first of all, thank you to Katie and Angela for putting this together. It's a very exciting day, and it's a nice opportunity to see my old mentor, my mentor. So I think the plan today is I just have a small number of questions for Bob, and then I think about halfway through, which maybe you guys can signal us, or we will we'll let you guys ask the questions. So the first question I had for Bob is who would you say stands out as important influences in your approach to research and scholarship?
Well, you used the right word, influence. I don't have heroes, except maybe for Tina Fey. But as for professional influences, there are 3 mentors I had who each gave me a different perspective on the approach to research. Starting out at Chapel Hill with Chester Isco, who really gave me the tools of the logician's trade. He taught me how to distill hypotheses in a linear, logical way from theory, then how to derive tests based on those hypotheses, and then how to structure, how to create experimental traps, actually, for the effects. He would structure things so that if there was an effect, we were going to snare it. There was no glib analysis allowed. There was no sloppy thinking. If there was this effect, we were going to derive it, we were going to find it, we're going to capture it. So that was very important to me, the precision of that kind of approach to finding interesting phenomena. Also, one of my advisors at Chapel Hill was John Tebow, and he took a different approach.
Sloppy?
No. Instead of chasing and instead of trapping effects, he would circle. So if we sat in a room with, we're devising a study, and the question was, let's say, do people negotiate differently when they are bargaining for themselves versus if they have a constituency that they have to bargain for? He would say, well, what have the great novelists of our time said about this conflict? And we think about the great novels, the fiction that we read, what these minds had said about that particular human difference.
God, you had to go to the library to go?
Or at least think about these things. And then he would say, well, what have the philosophers said about this? So we'd go from Henry James to William James. And then he'd say, after we talked about that, what the philosophical issues were, well, what have our sister disciplines, political science, anthropology, sociology, what have they said about this? And then finally, we would get to, well, what have other social psychologists said about this? And it seemed to me interesting that this place that we ended was where I would start with every other research advisor. But what he did with this wide circles was to give us stores of information that we wouldn't have gotten if we started where we did start, in the literature of social psychology. That was very valuable, and that kind of diversity at the outset. And then I did a postdoc with Stan Schechter, about a 2-year postdoc. And whereas Chet taught me how to snare effects, and John taught me how to circle them, Stan taught me how to chase them wherever they led. It didn't matter to him where he started conceptually. He would chase the data and take their counsel like no one else I had ever worked with. I thought it was interesting that he wrote a classic book back in the 50s called Affiliation, the examination of the affiliative tendencies of species. And in the preface, he said that this began as a study of isolation. He started studying recluses, and then this morphed into the study of affiliation. And I asked him about it when I first got there, the first week I was there, and he said, you know, what I found out, what I recognized, is that the power was not in isolation. It's not what we did as a species. No, the power was in affiliation, and so that's where I went. And I thought it was so interesting that he was willing to get off this horse he was riding in midstream, get on another horse going in the other direction, because that's where he thought the most important phenomenon. Right? So I think I don't consider that I'm fully any of those approaches. What I try to do is select the best from them in terms of how they fit with my own preferences and forge an identity of my own.
Well, thanks for sharing not only your lineage, but also my lineage. So I appreciate that I've gotten the benefit of a lot of that. Very few people know that actually when I was trying to figure out who I wanted to work with in grad school, the way that I did it was I reread my social psychology book from beginning to end. And anytime somebody had a very clever experiment, it did not matter what the topic was. It just, whatever, a clever, cool experiment or anything that had any kind of impact, I wrote their name down and put a little tick by their name. And at the end, one name rose above all others, Kurt Lewin, but he was dead. So, second, no, I'm kidding. Bob was at the top. Bob was at the top of that list, and it's good to know now where some of that comes from. So you've written recently that how you've seen the status of behavioral science change dramatically during your career. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, just in terms of some personal experiences, we are now in the golden age of behavioral science, it seems to me, and it's fairly recent. As long as, I think it was 10 or 12 years ago, I was invited to a government policy conference in the Netherlands. And when I got there, I saw the agenda, and they had me listed as a behavioral economist. And I went to the organizer. I said, I'm trained as a social psychologist. And he whispered to me, I couldn't have gotten you funded. I couldn't have got you approved as a social psychologist. And that's 12 years ago. All that's gone. I think the rise in behavioral science has to do with the conjoint elevation of behavioral economics on the one hand and social psychology on the other. So that's one side. And now governments are all of us to want to know about our thinking and our findings. The other is military intelligence. Again, several years ago, maybe even longer, maybe 15 years ago, I was invited to a psychological PSYOP conference that the UN put on. They sent their psychological operations officers to this big conference in Brussels, and I was on the agenda. So was the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence of the United States. And when he was speaking, I wasn't allowed in the room because I didn't have the clearance. I didn't have security clearance. And so they gave me to this young Turkish lieutenant who was supposed to occupy my time and keep me busy and entertained. And so he arranged for me to have a tour of this big surveillance communications plane. They called it Commando Solo. And I went on to this thing, and it was packed with technology and computers. You had a little aisle that you could walk through. Everything else was full of technology, and they were telling me about all the things they could do. They could fly over Puerto Rico and get any radio transmission, and even shut down any radio transmission in all of Puerto Rico. They're telling me all these things, and wow, I was surprised that they were being so open about this secretive stuff. And I came off the plane, and as I came down the walkway, the crew was all standing at attention as I came down, and then they saluted me. And I said to my liaison, this Turkish lieutenant, I said, geez, I didn't realize that behavioral science has such respect within the military. He said, listen, I had to find something for you to do for 90 minutes, right, while the Undersecretary of Defense was speaking. And so I got you this tour, but it was secure, right? So I told the crew that you were the Undersecretary. And that's what I just said. Fast forward to today, they're saluting the hell out of us. Really, for our ideas, our findings, our thinking, right now. I've seen, so those are the changes, the kind of change. Besides, of course, in corporate America, NGOs, sports, and we're everywhere now.
Do you think it's changed even since your breakup letter to, have you guys read Bob's breakup letter to social psychology? It is beautifully written, and I think that in and of itself had an impact in terms of people recognizing the importance of this kind of work.
Well, I don't know, I haven't been able to calibrate that, but I know that we're at the top of our game right now.
So many of us, or probably almost everybody here, has read Influence, which has sold how many copies now?
4 million.
4 million copies, quite amazing. So I remember you told me that the kind of impetus for Influence was your going undercover in the various training programs of sales professionals and other professionals. Can you tell us about that and whether there was anything you learned beyond what you put in Influence?
Well, yeah, so I decided that initially I was going to go into the training programs of various influence professions, sales, marketing, advertising, recruiting, even charity, solicitation, and those kinds of things, and see what the practitioners were doing. Because Bill McGuire said, follow the practitioner's rule of thumb. And I thought that would be a good way to kickstart studies that I could do. I knew that if I went into the professions that made a living getting people to say yes, I would see techniques and practices, but they didn't know why those techniques and practices worked. It wasn't their job. They just needed to get them to work. Why they worked was my job. So I was going to find these and then take them to my laboratory and try to understand them. And so I was in these various settings, and it wasn't long before I said to myself, oh, here's a book. This is just about a lab. There's a whole stores of knowledge about how the influence process works in big settings, in naturally occurring settings that we really don't have access to when we study them on our campuses and our labs. And so that's what was the impetus for the book, was to recognize there's something more. It's a Shakespearean in the sense that I got off this horse, you got on another horse. But there was one interesting thing that I learned beyond what I put in the book. I felt, even though in those days you didn't have to get informed consent, I thought it was necessary for me. So after I would spend time in the training programs of these organizations, at the end I would reveal myself, and I'd say, I'm actually not a candidate for your used car lot. I'm a university professor, and I'm doing research for a book on influence. I'm going into various kinds of professions. And I'm going to tell you something before I say anything else, I'm going to give you a copy of my book when it comes out. This was a calculated strategy on my part to get them to agree to let me use the book. Because I knew about the rules of reciprocation. And you know, certainly, that you go first. You don't say, you give me this and then I'll give you the book. You know, you say, I'm going to give you the book, no matter what you say, and I'm going to send you a pre-publication copy of that book. So you get this information before all of your competitors, right? And I expected that would help. But there was something that happened, and I think it did, but there was something that happened that I didn't expect. They said, wait a minute, you're a university professor, and we're teaching you. You're our student. We're your teacher. And they puff up their chest, and, of course, you can. So it seems to me it was more than just giving them a compliment. It was giving them a role of teacher. And teachers don't hoard information. Teachers disseminate information. And in that role, 100% permission to use the data. Yeah.
That actually reminds me of when Bob and I were doing the hotel experiments back in the 2000s, and I remember that I remember his name. Tom Kreitler was the manager of the Holiday Inn, and I remember we gave him a plaque that said, this award goes to Tom Kreitler for advancing science, with the Arizona State University. And the look on his face when we handed him this plaque, it wouldn't surprise me if he's going to take that in his coffin with him. So that's interesting. So for those of us in the audience who are thinking about writing a book to try to disseminate the ideas of our research and trying to influence practitioners to create greater good in the world, and what advice would you have for those aspiring authors?
There are several pieces of advice, but we have limited time, so let me suggest a couple. First of all, get an agent. You need an agent. Okay? Those people know the landscape, they know which houses would be interested in the kind of topics that you have in mind. They can be great sources of counsel for your style and even the content of what you put in the book. But more than that, if you have an agent, you gain credibility in the eyes of the publishing house. And the evidence is you get a bigger advance if you have an agent speaking in your behalf. The other thing about having an agent making the case for the greatness of this book that you've written, instead of you having to do it, is that you don't have to look like a self-aggrandizing, self-promotional jerk. Somebody else can do that for you. And your editor likes you more, your publisher likes you more as a consequence, and you have a better rapport with that. So that's one thing. Here's another thing I found. When I was writing Influence, part of the time I was writing it in my university office, part of the time I was writing it in a home office with a window that looked over a pedestrian street. And about halfway through the first quarter of the book, I brought the two piles of paper production together and looked at them, and I saw that what I had written at home was dramatically better than what I had written at the office. And I think I understand why now, because at the office, all of my sight lines brought me cues of how to write and speak for an academic audience, and I wasn't writing for an academic audience. There's a certain terminology, there's certain diction, there's certain kind of style that you use when interacting with your colleagues that isn't appropriate for a general leadership book, which this was intended to be. So the consequence was that I took everything that I was writing for my colleagues, and and put it in my office. And everything I was writing for the book, I wrote while I was looking out over a street where the people I was writing for were going. They were the ones who were cueing the approaches that I should take to this. And here's a good example. The first line in Influence, in its initial form that was written in my office was, I'm trying to remember exactly here. My home discipline, experimental social psychology, has as one of its principal domains the study of everyday human interaction. When I took it back home and I rewrote it, it became, I can admit it freely now. All my life I've been a sucker. Maybe you can see the upgrade.
Okay, so you're saying context matters. That's good. That's a good thing to know. Just a couple more questions I have for you, and then we'll turn it up to you guys. What's the most, and I've never really asked you this prior to being here. What's the most surprising result you've ever gotten, and what did you learn from it?
It wasn't in an experiment, but it was in a technique that I took with my colleague. You remember Sandy Graver. We were working with the Census Bureau, and we needed to get answers to a survey from a group of adults. We had control over our classes and the students in our classes. We could get them to fill out the survey. But so what I did was and we needed almost all of them who were asked to do it. We didn't want any missing data. So I asked my students in a class that I was teaching, 165 students in the class, to send a copy of the survey to their same-sex parent, right? And tell them that if the parent filled out this survey and sent it back within 2 weeks, the student would get 1 extra point on 1 exam in my class. I got 162 surveys back. We don't study the power of families enough. The power of family connection. I'm a grandfather now, and I think I've identified a way to improve from 162 to even better. I think if I had asked my students to send this to a grandparent, they would have gotten 164 out of the 165. The missing one would be some grandfather who experienced a cardiac infarction racing to the mailbox. Yeah, so I think one of the things that was surprising was the power of this. And it's not something that we systematically, we give this to other disciplines to study, and I don't think we should.
Thank you. So I will ask you what's the best professional advice that you've ever gotten, but I think it's more interesting to ask you what's the worst professional advice that you've ever gotten?
The worst professional advice. I don't know if I can answer that, but I'll tell you a piece of professional advice that I got that seems to me incomplete. When I was an undergraduate, I asked my research advisor at the time, what should I study? How do I know what I should study? And he said, just study what you're interested in. And I've heard other people say that. It seems too facile by half. Any graduate student worth his or her salt is interested in a lot of things. Right? If you're interested, you're interested in a lot of things. Here's the proper question. Of the things you're interested in, which should you prioritize? How do you know what to select among that array of things you're interested in? And it did seem to me that over the years, there were some hints, some evidence that I got. They almost all had to do with evidence of hidden power in a phenomenon or an effect. So, for example, if you find an effect that is larger than the circumstances that would warrant such a large effect, that's worth studying. Because there's something underneath there that's driving this effect, even with small changes in circumstances. I'll give you an example. When I was visiting professor at Ohio State University, the social psychology program was actually located in the stadium, in the halls of the stadium. And I had tickets to the game on Saturdays, and I would go on Saturday mornings and I'd work on something, and then it was game time. I would go through some halls and out into the bowl of the stadium. And I was working on a particular project where I was getting about 3/4 of standard deviation difference in the treatment group than the control group on some persuasion tactic that I was investigating. But I needed a full standard deviation, right, in order to get it statistically significant. And I was thinking about this, and there are various techniques that you learn about how to do this sort of thing. So, for example, you can increase the N, increase the power. You can also decrease the error variance by reducing the number of experimenters who are running your study. Or you can use a stronger operationalization of your variables, even though it will be less representative of how that variable exists in actually occurring situations. There are all these little tricks. And I was thinking what to do. And then I went out onto into the stands. And as I was going to my seat, the Ohio State football team ran onto the field. That's all. And the place went into bedlam. People were up and shouting, they were singing the fight song, they were spilling beer on one another, just from running onto the field. And I thought to myself, Cialdini, you're studying the wrong thing. Here's the power. This is again a Shakespearean. He was channeling me right there. Cialdini, you're studying the wrong thing. Look at this, the power of fandom is in sports situation. And so I stopped studying this thing and went on to study the psychology of sports fans.
The basking and reflecting.
In basking and reflective glory, that kind of research tradition. I thought that was, so when that's the case, when something small produces a big effect, take the reins of that. That's an indication that this is likely to produce strong effects and a programmatic set of studies to examine that big effect. Another is, when you find something that causes people to act in ways that are against their inherent characteristics and proclivities, when you've got something that turns introverts into extroverts, that turns honest people into dishonest people, that tells me there's power there. And you know this work. We did some work at the Petrified Forest National Park, where they had a problem. People were stealing petrified wood from the forest floor, crystals, and they had signage up that we thought was problematic. The signage said, "So many people are stealing crystals that is causing a..." And we thought to ourselves, no, wait a minute, that's social proof indicating that that's what's the norm here. That's the wrong message. Well, I don't know if you know, but how I got the idea for this was, Kelvin Rose. He was a graduate student of mine who came from Los Angeles. He's working in the advertising world. One of the ways I tried to get diversity into my thinking, I would get people from in the business world or from non-North American students or people who were not psychology majors. Anyway, so he was coming with his fiance, who he described as the single most honest person he had ever known. She wouldn't borrow a paperclip that she didn't return. She was honest in every sense. Well, they decided they were going to go to the petrified forest and examine it. So they got to the gate and they saw this big sign, that said, so many people are taking that it's reducing, it's undermining the quality of the forest. And he said, before he was finished reading the sign, he felt her elbow in his ribs, and she whispered to him, "We better get ours too." The most honest person he has ever met becomes an environmental criminal and loots a national resource? What did that sign say? What was in that sign that could have produced that kind of power? So, that's the sort of thing. There was also one other example I'll give you, and it was I studied something called, the even a penny would help. Okay? And this is when I noticed something in myself. Somebody came to my door and was asking for a contribution to a cause, I guess it was the United Way, and I had already given to the United Way at the office. And so, as she was making her case, I was about to say, but yes, I appreciate your cause, but I've already, and as I was saying it, she said, even a penny would help. And it caught that response in my throat. Even a penny would help. How could I say no to that? Didn't matter that, because she was saying even a penny was acceptable. She wasn't saying, give me a penny. No, that would have been stupid. She was saying, look, I'm legitimizing small contributions. Right? Now, how do I make sense of myself if I won't give a penny, right? As an altruistic person? So those were the kind of things where you see these powerful effects that seem to be under the surface. Get on that horse.
Isn't that how Katie got you here today? She said even 5 minutes would help, and here we are, 55 minutes.
Yeah.
I did send Richard wine before I asked him. It's true. That's nice. I've read Influence a few times.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for these really interesting stories and advice. I know
Let me tell you about the best.
Oh, best advice, right? What about you guys? All I cared about was the worst advice. Yeah, go ahead.
It was not in an academic setting. When I was in high school, I was a good enough baseball player that I got an offer to play minor league baseball for a Philadelphia Phillies farm team in the Tri-State League of Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois. And the scout who was, and I was a center fielder, I wanted it to be Willie Mays or Matthew Mantle. And so this guy, his name was Buddy Brief. He was a scout for it. He had been in the major leagues for a while, and now he was a scout.
That sounds too fictitious to be real.
And so he gave me this contract. It was like he played Class D baseball, and then you try to work your way up. There was no money associated with it. And so I'm going to sign this, and the pen doesn't work. So he goes to his car, and I walk with him, and he says, offhandedly, so let me ask you something. How good are you at school? Pretty good. Is it good enough to go to college? Yeah. Good enough to graduate college? Yeah. Do you like it? Yeah. Go to school. He said, you're not good enough to make it. So I'll take a flyer on you, it doesn't cost me anything. You're not good enough. And then he was right. You know what a slider is? I couldn't hit a slider. It's a pitch that looks like a fastball, then becomes a curve right at the end. And he was right. And what he did, it struck me as against what you often hear people say, go for your passion. Go. No, he was saying, go for what you're good at and like at the same time. And you know, if there hadn't been a pen that didn't work, and if he hadn't given here's what would have happened to me. I get into Class D baseball, and maybe I get up a few ranks to Class C, and even to Class AA. And then what happens, if you don't get to the majors, you start going down. Okay? And then eventually, the organization decides they're not going to give you a contract anymore, because they don't think you're going to make it all the way. Well, that takes years to find that out. And suppose I had done that, and it took 4 years, and now I'm 22, and maybe I have maybe I'm married, maybe I have a baby. And I get out of baseball in Coeur d'Alene, Iowa, or Cozad, Nebraska. And I don't get to go to school. I don't get to go to university. I become the assistant manager of Pizza Hut in Cozad, Nebraska.
I think you could make full manager.
No, I could probably maybe even get a couple of franchise locations of the Pizza Hut around the Cozad area. I would be the pizza king. But here's the truth. No, we're not sitting here together if he hadn't given that piece of advice. And it was very important. I don't tell my students, go for your passion. I give them the advice in fun brief. That was the best advice I ever got.
Wow. So one dry pen changed
One
behavioral
dry pen.
science forever. That's quite amazing. All right, why don't we go out to you guys? What questions do you guys have for Bob? Katie?
Can I ask a question of you, Noah?
No.
Oh, I like this.
What is the best advice you ever got from your advisor?
Good question. It was advice so I don't know this is the best advice. This is when everyone's staring at you, it's the first thing that comes to your mind. The best advice I ever got, but it may not be good for this audience, but for grad students, was I wanted to do a project on proving that Dan Gilbert was wrong in one of his papers. Which was a social cognition paper. It's the paper, for those of you who may know, you can't not believe everything you read, which is that people automatically believe what they read and they reject if they have the cognitive ability. And I looked at that and I said, yeah, but it's only in this small one case. Dan Gilbert's got it wrong. And I'm going to go show everybody that he's wrong, this guy, fancy guy from Harvard. And I went to Bob and I said, I want to do this for my master's thesis. And you know what Bob said? Don't. Bob said, that you might be right, but I don't know anything about social cognition, or about this particular type of thing. And so you're going to be on your own. I don't have the ability to give you this sort of mentorship. And I said, thanks very much, Bob. I'm going to do it anyway. And then I proceeded to do it, and I had 4 studies where I attempted to, and I got kind of middling data, some supportive, some not, and it was a total failure. And that taught me that A, you should listen to your advisor, generally, but B, that collaborations, you need to somebody has to have the expertise. You can't jump too far from where you are. And I will say, by the way, 3 months after that failed master's thesis was done, someone else did the exact same idea and showed that Dan Gilbert was wrong. But they are social cognition experts, and so that's what I learned.
Well, a follow-on question, what have you learned about mentoring? What advice do you have for mentors?
Yeah, I am a hands-off mentor. That is, I don't want to channel people into directions that they are not willing to go spontaneously. And so you have some graduate students who then go to the top because of that, because they grab the idea, they make it their own, they find the timetable that works best for them. Richard once asked me a question. So he said, so were you always good at this? And what I said was, no, I was a better high school student than primary school, elementary school student, and I was a better college student than a high school student, and I was a better graduate student than I was a college student, and I was a better professional than I was as a graduate student, because in every one of those cases, I had more control over the questions that I asked and the way that I approached them. And so that's how I think about the mentoring process. Of course, you have to be there for counsel, like no, but go ahead and do it if you want to. But I really wasn't going to be holding their hand. That wasn't the way to build a professional.
Your petrified wood story, one of the great experiments of all time. The anecdote you related about the world's most honest woman got me thinking. With all the talk about climate change, are we inadvertently sending the message that you better get your Hummer now before it's illegal?
Yeah. I think it's worrisome that we are telling people that there's almost nothing we can do unless there's some kind of big revision in human behavior. We're sunk. So you might as well go ahead and get your Hummer now, because enjoy it, right? Get your. But I like the fact that there's research to show if you tell people that there are things they can do, right, that will make a difference, then their belief that climate change is inevitable and we're sunk changes as a result of giving them implementable steps to take. So I think that's what I do.
Can you do me a favor and have a conversation with George Lowenstein?
Okay. Yeah, because he got, yeah. Right. See, no, your questions were so thorough that we've covered the water. What do we have to about?
Hi, sorry. Thank you so much for such an interesting conversation. I'd be interested in, when you talked about your home office versus your university office and your writing routines, can you say more about how you manage your time between different activities? The general audience writing, scholarly writing, teaching. How over your career have you thought about that?
And it's not a pretty story, because what I wound up doing is very often not what I really wanted to do, but what was urgent. And that was what was at the office. And so the leftover time, often when I was burned out and couldn't really spend a lot of time on thinking about a general leadership book, and so your question is a good one, because I decided to retire a few years ago to write a new book, this book called Persuasion. I couldn't get it out of me while I had all of these university holes and draws. I would come in the morning, every morning, with making progress on the book at the top of my agenda. And I would go home every night, not a word, because of everything that happened around me and that was more compelling in an urgency kind of way. And I thought to myself, if this is really the top of the agenda, I have to flip the script here. I have to make it the thing that I do in a concentrated way. And the other stuff is secondary. So I still have an office at my university. I still come in every day to work. I still write. But I don't have those pulls and draws that keep me from doing what I think is most important. It's not even what I like to do most, it's what I think is most valuable for me to be spending my time doing. Yeah. Yes. Okay, wait, Wendy and then Kate.
So, you gave us a maybe more positive view of the field and your sense of it at this point than in your breakup letter to the field earlier. I wanted to encourage you to write an update on that breakup letter. I think that was very discouraging for some students, and it would be lovely to have maybe an update that outlined how you think this is the golden age for behavior change research, and what you see we're bringing to the world that we didn't before.
Mm.
If I'm interpreting you correctly.
Well,
in your
yeah, well, if you remember the theme of the breakup letter was that
Change my mind. Let's get back together. That's not me,
Yeah.
that's correct.
it was that I could no longer, in good conscience, accept new graduate students to work with me because there wasn't a way for field research, which I do best, to be prioritized within the publication system of our discipline. And those students would come wanting to be trained in field research and wanting to be candidates for the best jobs available in behavioral. And I could only guarantee the first of those, because those you can't get those field studies published without doing multiple studies for long periods of time where you don't have mediational evidence available, right? You can't stop and give people a questionnaire in a parking lot or an amusement park, something like that. And so what said is, look, I have to step away because I just, for the sake of those students, I can still do laboratory research too, but I can't train the students and feel good about their prospects because my colleague next door, who works only in the laboratory, can produce 3 publications by the time we get permission to do a large-scale field study. But I think that's changing. I'm seeing more of a movement, and I think it's the model of behavioral economics, actually, that we're adopting. Large-scale field studies with multiple conditions and studies at the same time. So I'm seeing more of that. But I don't want to imply that we should all be doing only field studies. In fact, the best of this is some hybrid. There's some field work, there's some experimental work. And I think some people mistook what I was suggesting is that the field in general needs to get their act together and into. No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting that we need more field work. That's all. And what I tried to do is, for example, with Betsy Pollock, she and I wrote a chapter on field methodology. So in every methods course, there's a way to learn about how to do field. I funded an award for the best field research. And the one thing that I don't think has happened is that journal editors have given field research grace and recognized that there are difficulties and features associated with field research that make it more valuable than some experiments in a lab, but they don't give it the same kind of, they don't give it the same latitude for for maybe finding results that you can't nail down and meet with mediational evidence, that sort of thing.
Well, then it sounds like you do have enough paper to
I
write.
have another bit. I'll tell you something that happened to me once and it showed me that some people were taking this wrong. After that paper came out, I was at a conference and a middle-level social psychologist came up to me, very prominent, very productive, and he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "So, I guess you think that those of us who are doing laboratory research are doing shit." Right? And I said, "No, not at all. You know who it was? Dietrich Staffel. He couldn't be wrong. He could never be wrong, even if it meant, so he couldn't be wrong in the approach he took, he couldn't be wrong in the results that he got from his experiments. So I clearly was not communicating properly about what I was saying about why I was stepping away." Yes.
I'm happy to ask a closing question,
Yeah.
if that's okay.
Sure.
And what I was wondering, which is really the reason we're gathered here today, which is to come up with good new ideas and make the world a better place through social science, is if in the last decade, since you did step away, there are any phenomena you have observed that you feel should be studied, things like everyone standing up when the Ohio State football team came in, or an honest person stealing petrified wood, and then we'll go get on studying it.
So I would say it like this: there are two things that I think need more attention within, at least within persuasion science, change science. One is resistance, and the other is persistence. Now, you folks have been brilliant in deciding that we have to understand persistence of the changes that we have. We have to focus on durable, enduring change. What we don't see is much research on how you resist influences. What are the factors that allow you to do that? Most of the research is how you generate change, right? And especially with this whole bots and Facebook stuff, we've got to figure out how to enable people to deflect and reject unwelcome influences.
Thank you so much for doing this.